right, I got 6 o'clock. Let's go ahead and call the committee of the whole board meeting tonight. The purpose of today's meeting is to review the 2021 executive program budget. So Jesse, you want to go ahead and get us started, please?
Absolutely. Thank you very much, President Brumwell. I want to start by saying tonight's workshop, as the village president pointed out, is to take the first blush look at the 2021 executive budget. This is the budget proposal put together by my office following budget submittals from every department and review by committee, and also individual meetings with the departments to refine the budget submittals in order to comply with longstanding policy, issues, state programs, etc. That said, we do have department heads and staff in attendance, but I do want to take a quick moment to introduce our new Park and Recreation Director, Megan Fallon, to the village board. Otherwise, all other department heads are in attendance this evening as well. Director Hanson from the library is joining us via Zoom. So with that, on your dais this evening, I did place a paper copy of what I normally have for a PowerPoint presentation on the screen. However, flipping between Zoom meeting and the PowerPoint, I have not been able to successfully do that on a consistent basis. So therefore, we will be following the paper copy that has been distributed. Everybody in the Zoom meeting also has a paper copy. Staff in attendance does as well. With that, moving to page 2 of the packet, it speaks to the guiding principles of the 2021 executive budget creation. Really, a budget is a financial blueprint that combines long-held policy interests with the village's adopted areas of emphasis. So those policy interests include such things as maintaining a minimum fund balance level of 25%, looking to hit a certain mileage of road rehabilitation. There are areas of emphasis being the fiscal integrity, providing excellent service, civic engagement, and sustainability. With that, we also look to comply with the state of Wisconsin laws or program guidelines in that this budget being presented this evening is balanced. By state law, it must be. It also meets state levy limit requirements. It also meets expenditure restraint program requirements. That expenditure restraint is a voluntary program that municipalities may or may not participate in. I will touch on that a little bit more later in my presentation. So as with all budgets, it starts with an inflow of revenues and then an outflow of expenses. This next page here takes a high-level look and breaks out the different revenue sources that the village does receive. So you'll see a portion of that, 19%, is proprietary revenues. Those proprietary revenues are strictly utility, user fee revenues that are kept within the utility. That said, the largest chunk of this graph are tax revenues, broken out room taxes, TID increments, and property taxes. Property taxes are by and large the most significant revenue source for any municipality here in the state of Wisconsin. The state of Wisconsin is somewhat unique in this, as there is a very heavy reliance on property tax revenue for municipalities statewide. Broken out a little bit further, you look and see other financing sources being tax incremental financing, district donations. We do have some TIDs that are underperforming. Therefore, the healthier TIDs donate increment to those underperforming TIDs to maintain a level of balanced budget there. We also see transfers in between funds, such as general fund transfers into some of the special revenue funds, for instance, aquatics. We'll also see some dollars coming from the utilities into the general fund for different operational or project needs. Other breakouts include miscellaneous revenues being interest earnings, donations, pilot payments, but then we get into charges for service, intergovernmental revenues, what we charge other people, those intergovernmental charges, special assessments, and fines and forfeitures, but those are much smaller pieces of the revenue pie. Flipping the page and looking back at that most significant portion of the village's revenue being tax levy. The long and short of it is, when you start looking at the levy limits that are applied to municipalities and looking looking at the consumer price index, which generally speaking is a good gauge of the cost of doing business. The cost of doing business is not decreasing. However, we are limited on what we can do with regards to adopted tax levy. That said, for the last 6 years, the consumer price index has outpaced our ability to tax levy. Thus, in some instances, we are not able to keep up with market conditions to have revenues match the cost of doing business, so to speak. That said, what we have built in the 2021 budget is a 1% increase in consumer price index. The final number of that consumer price index figure is yet to be released. We should have that in hand later this month. So this budget does assume a 1% consumer price index increase. Consumer price index is also important as it is the primary factor behind the expenditure restraint program, which the village has historically participated in. Moving over to page 5 of the handout, slide number 5. The expenditure restraint program compliance, again, has been historically been a program that the village participates in due to the fact we receive state aid dollars for that, or a revenue source. So, expenditure restraint program, in essence, likes tax levy spending to the consumer price index. Compliance with the expenditure restraint program for this particular year of 2021 budget would provide us $94,000 in state aid. Now that is down from previous years, however, that is still a significant revenue dollar number that would either have to be replaced by levy, which isn't necessarily possible because we levy what we can under the state law, use of fund balance, other revenues. So the long and short of it is $94,000 is real money, and it is definitely in our best interest as a community to participate in that program. That said, compliance was a difficult task this year under these conditions. The initial budget requests, excluding utility, were about $326,000 above the village's ERP threshold. That said, all departments were touched with regards to what could we do to present a budget to the village board that is still balanced, meets the needs of the departments, still maintains all levels of service, but also complies with the expenditure restraint program. That said, some efforts we took throughout the budget. We are proposing in the 2021 budget a cost of living adjustment for non-represented staff. However, it would be split. It would be, instead of a 2%, which has been customary over the last few years, we would look at a 1% January 1 and a 1% on July 1. That mathematically, that does create a budget savings. In the fire department special revenue fund, there's been a significant attention paid to the need to address not only overtime, but also market rate adjustments for our paid-on-call folks. Looking to address that matter, but in essence, via a compromise here, we're looking to split that market rate adjustment across budget year 2021 and budget year 2022 for those paid-on-call members. We would look to basically do half in the fiscal year 21 and then do another market rate adjustment or address that second half in 2022, being move all categories, some in 21 and then again in 22. There are no adjustments for the chief or division chief, albeit discussed at committee of the whole. We tried, we simply could not allocate or address that expenditure and maintain compliance without sacrificing significantly somewhere else. That said, with the police department, we refined training proposals. Training was identified as a significant priority for the department. With that, working with the chief and his staff, we did refine those proposals to boil down that expenditure request. We also conducted a trend analysis of their various accounts, looking at historical expenditure limits and looking to match those up and again, whittling away at the expenses that were requested. Public Works was touched in that their request for a new additional full-time employee is not included in the 21 budget. We also here too, like other departments, did a trend analysis of the various accounts to look to find savings where we could. Park and Recreation was adjusted very slightly with regards to refining the training request. Otherwise, the budget submittal from the previous director remained in place. And specifically what that refining of the training request is changing from a national conference, refining that to much more localized training for the new director versus national stage training. With that, capital funds were also impacted here, where we did reduce the police squad allocation. So a couple of things come into play here. Staff is working diligently with Enterprise on researching a leasing option for fleet vehicles. So, number one, that would bring the cost down, but if for whatever reason that does not prove feasible for us, we wanted an allocation to purchase squads, because as you know, we need a reliable police fleet. So the historical rotation of police squad purchases, 2, 2, 3. 2021 was a 3 squad year in the rotation, so to speak. That said, knowing the budget crunch we were under, and also the research into the potential of the leasing arrangement, we reduced it, where there is an allocation there that either would address the leasing arrangement potential. We do have an initial proposal in hand, however, it needs to be refined. That is why it is not being presented further at this time. But it would address that, or it would purchase 2 squads instead of the customary 3 in a given year. So either way, we can address the police fleet. We did revise a police department project for license plate cameras, taking a different form and tack, which brought that project cost down. We did remove several pieces of equipment from the Public Works equipment budget, and then also the Village Hall phone system was removed from the capital budget, again for cost-saving measures in order to meet the expenditure restraint program guideline. Moving into the next slide, page 6 here, really backing up and taking a high-level look at the total financial plan for the village. We are actually seeing a decrease in overall expenditures from the previous year to the tune of about 4.5%. That said, some aspects are up, some are down, and some are status quo. The general fund, we are up just over 1%, primarily due to insurance premiums being health, work comp, liabilities, but also refuse collection. Our contractual cost, there is an annual escalator in that contract, which is addressed as well. Special revenue funds up slightly. That is the maintenance of efforts of the tax levy support to the library. Fire department also sees an increase as well. To touch on that overtime and paid on call market rate adjustment that I spoke to a bit earlier. Debt service funds, this is down. That's definitely a very significant positive for the budget, as there is less debt service excluding utility. The Headworks project will come home to roost, so to speak, in the coming years, but right now that can be reported as coming down. The fiduciary fund is the Woodlawn Cemetery. That's the sale of plots and general maintenance of the village-owned cemetery. There is no change there. Proprietary funds up slightly. That is really in anticipation of debt service for the Headworks building, which begins mid to late next year and then on into future years. So you see that slight adjustment there. Capital improvement funds, I touched on it earlier. We're looking at reduced equipment spending, so that particular portion of the budget is down as well. Looking at breaking out the individual areas. So on the next slide, I break out the general fund, and really look to show in 2 different ways the comparison between the 2020 budget and the 2021 proposed budget, whereby general government, being administration, village board, legal, clerk, finance, actually is seeing a decrease in allocations. There are other allocations that are upticking slightly, primarily due to the cost of doing business, if you will. One thing that looks a bit out of place with the table is the unclassified row, in that the 2020 adopted budget shows a $74,007 budget figure. That is the figure after $50,000 of wage reserve had been transferred to the departments up above. So each year, for the cost of living adjustments and merit adjustments, we have an account called wage reserve. And we park an allocation in that wage reserve account, which is then divvied out during the course of the next calendar year as those adjustments happen. Basically, it's a way of saying, yes, we have this reserve, but we don't want to assume everybody is getting X merit or Y merit. It is able to adapt to the different performance evaluation scores and salary circumstances as needed, and then comes to the village board for transferring back out from that wage reserve account into the necessary departmental account. So in actuality, that 2020 unclassified figure should read about $50,000 higher. So the year-to-year change wouldn't be as significant as what is initially shown in that table. So that's a point of clarification there. So that executive column, the 2021 executive column, under unclassified, that $133,000 number, that does include the wage reserve allocation for 2021, whereby that would be transferred out to the other departments listed above over the course of 2021 with village board action. So moving into the next slide, page 8, we look at tax levy support for special revenue fund budgets. So we do have a series of special revenue fund budgets in that they are funded either by non-tax levy revenues or a combination of tax levy and non-tax levy revenues, being fees, impact fees, interfund transfers, taxes, sales of plots, etc. So with that, and I did mention how the library and fire do see a bit of an increase in the amount of tax levy support. There is a status quo of tax levy support for the aquatics and the park and open space. Recreation does actually see a bit of a decrease in tax levy support to its budget, and that is based upon programming changes that were submitted by the previous director. So that is a slight decrease based upon that budget submittal. And you'll note here broken out the other special revenue funds that are funded via non-tax levy revenues. I do note the various sources of funding for those particular funds as well. Moving on to page 9, we touch on debt service. The long and short of it is we, as an organization, as a municipality rather, there are some projects that we simply cannot pay with cash in hand. Just some things that are just above our levy capacity and expenditure capacity. So therefore, there is some debt that is being carried. With that, we do have an overall debt service expense of about $3.6 million. This is a decrease of about $541,000, which again, that is an ongoing trend here, which I was tasked when I walked in the door here 4 years ago to address the debt service and ensure that we continue trending in the right direction there. With that, tax levy is being applied to debt service in the amount of about $329,000. That the impact on the tax rate is noted there, about 21 cents per $1,000 of assessed value. An interesting note here too, state law does limit the amount of debt a municipality can carry. So that debt to capacity ratio, we are at 52% of the total allowable debt that we can carry. So we're just over half of what we could carry in total as a community. That said, that trend line, if it were put on a graph, is going the right direction. We are down about 5% from a few years ago, and we do not have any new debt proposed in 2021. Refinancing, that is always an option that we look at on an annual and regular basis. We review all outstanding debt during the fiscal year for any refinancing or cost-saving opportunities as they present themselves. Flipping the page here to page 10, we touch on the proprietary funds. These are the water utility and the wastewater utilities. With that, in essence, these are standalone businesses, if you will, as part of the village budget, where the proprietary funds operate via user fees that are collected. Like I mentioned, similar to a private business that sells a service or a product and collects that revenue to continue their operations. So in this particular case, the product or service is providing clean drinking water and processing wastewater. You'll note that both the water utility and wastewater utility do have a retained earnings at the end of the year, so they are making money, which is what we need them to do. But we did have the culmination of a series of wastewater rate increases in order to position ourselves for debt service that is coming online with the Headworks building, but also to make sure we can address future smaller infrastructure needs with cash on hand. So you will see that both utilities are performing well under the 2021 budget proposal with regards to revenues versus requested expenditures. Turn the page to capital funds. I break out here the various capital project and or equipment funds in the various areas. You'll see the general being public works, police department, village hall. That falls under that general category of capital funds. The fire department equipment has its own capital fund. Again, that's by measure of the fire department is a standalone special revenue fund, so therefore their capital fund is a standalone entity as well within the confines of the budget, the tax and criminal financing districts, and the utilities. So with that, some highlights of the projects, the capital projects that we're looking at in 2021. We do address the longstanding yet informal policy of addressing a mile or more of road. We are looking at just about 1.1 miles of road rehabilitation, as well as a fully funded sidewalk rehabilitation program. Within the fire department's capital project budget, the highlights there include a kitchen compliance and update project, and also painting and minor repairs to the apparatus floor project. The tax and criminal financing districts, while there are no significant redevelopment projects listed within those districts, we do have them participating in a cost share for the road program, as it does, improving roads does help the village from an economic development standpoint. So there is a cost sharing mechanism there that we are looking to address various road program costs. The utility building, the ongoing Headworks building costs, the road program cost share as, let me back up a bit here. So the road program is actually broken out and cost shared between public works, utilities, when there is necessary utility work underneath. And in this particular budget year, we are also looking at, because road projects are within established tax and criminal financing districts, utilizing that as a cost share as well. So those three funding sources culminate into funding the road program. Water meter conversions are also a significant utility project forecasted within the 2021 budget proposal. Equipment, this includes police squads, a surveillance upgrade for the police department building itself, the license plate, camera reader system. Public Works has a dump truck replacement, skid loader replacement, and then in general, but spearheaded through Village Hall, is the computer replacement program. The fire department does have some equipment looking to be purchased in the form of a rescue boat and overhead door, replacement overhead door motors, and then the utility monitoring equipment, a pickup truck, and then an ongoing lease payment for the jetpack truck. So, flipping the page one more time here, page 12, one of the significant points of policy interest that has been adopted by the village board and is one of the significant points of the budget is fund balance management. The village is in a fortunate place where, by the very responsible expense oversight of our departments, we have been able to establish a healthy fund balance, whereby each year we can program some of that fund balance, or leftover dollars, if you will, from the previous year, to help mitigate any significant changes to the tax rate. This is an ongoing balancing act of responsibly using that fund balance and complying with the policy of that 25% of expenditures. So what we have in 2021 program is about $744,000 of fund balance. We exceed the 25% bottom line threshold. We remain at a very healthy 37% fund balance after that programmed amount. And you can see a historical look over the last handful of years, whereby the actual fund balance, where it stood compared to that 25% threshold figure. With that, you can see a little bit of a downward trend, looking at 2018 on the bottom, that orange bar, and moving upward to the 2021 row with the orange bar, you can see a slight downward trend in our fund balance. But that said, we are still very responsibly managing that. And again, we're very fortunate to have very fiscally conservative department heads that really are mindful as to what their departments expend with regards to the budget that is adopted each year. The next slide looks to give an idea of what the average cost would be for a resident here in Grafton. What we're looking at is, for the purposes of this graphic, we look at an average $250,000 home using an average of 68,000 gallons of water and creating 68,000 gallons of wastewater. Again, these are all averages here to help provide context for the mathematics. So with the 2021 budget, we are proposing a tax rate of just south of $6.22 per $1,000 of value. And that tax rate is significantly lower than last year's due to the revaluation project. And by that, we are approximately $1.11 lower with regards to a tax rate from the 2020 adopted budget. And again, that is a function of the revaluation of village properties, whereby there has been an average 22% revaluation adjustment to property values. So, sticking with this example for just a minute, and then I'd like to circle back and touch on how the revaluation would have impacted a tax bill, so to speak. So looking at this cost of living slide here, if you take an average home of $250,000, apply that $6.22 tax rate, apply the water fees and base charge, apply the sewer fees and base charge, annualize all of that, for about $2,600, property owners receive water, sanitary sewer, snow plowing, salting, fire, EMS, police services, parks and playgrounds, as well as other municipal services. That said, I think a very responsible tax rate and use of tax levy, and just taking a look at that cost of living impact for a resident. Now, this only takes into account the village portion of the property tax bill, as there are other portions, the MATC, the school district, etc. Now, I did mention how revaluation played a role in the drop of that tax rate. So our tax levy this year was adjusted slightly based upon the tax levy caps and the value of our net new construction here within the village. So the tax levy we're looking at for 2021 is just over $8 million. With that, last year it was $7.87 million. So up slightly, about 2.8%. Now, with the revaluation, going back to, let's say, the average home, $250,000, taking the average revaluation adjustment of 22%, that takes that home value to $305, or $305,000. So, if we take a look back at the 2020 adopted tax rate for a $250,000 home, so you have $250,000 home at a $7.32 per 1,000 of value tax rate, that's $1,830 village tax bill. Following revaluation with the updated tax rate for 2021, again, the average revaluation adjustment was 22%. So that $250,000 home would go to $305,000 in value. The 2021 tax rate, $6.22 per 1,000. So that tax bill for that home would then go to $1,897, or a difference of $67 from 2020 to 2021. To give an idea of what those impacts of a revaluation project would be. So while the average adjustment to property values seems very, very significant at 22%, at the end of the day, we're looking at about a 3.5% adjustment to what is paid on a tax bill based upon what we're looking to levy. for the 2021 budget. So with that, I wanted to break it down a little bit further. So you're taking that $1,555 average village property tax bill and breaking it out amongst the different program areas. And how does that $1,555 break apart? You're looking at about $500 for police services, $270 for capital expenditures. Public Works comes in at about $215 of that property tax bill. Fire and EMS, $172, and then so on and so forth, to the extent community development building inspection is about $1. So all of the building permit processing and inspections and land use planning is costing the average resident about $1 a year off of that property tax bill. So overall, just giving you an illustration of how the services are funded under an average village property tax bill. Going to the next slide, really just providing a summary of where we landed with this 2021 executive budget proposal before the committee to hold this evening to talk through and look to discuss. With that, it is a balanced budget that addresses departmental needs and provides and maintains all municipal services from DPW to fire and EMS to police to parks and recreation to general village operations. We do achieve the informal policy of the 1+ mile of roads being improved. We do achieve a reasonable tax rate. There's no new debt and a reduction of overall debt as part of this budget. The expenditure restraint program and levy limit are complied with, and we also do comply with the fund balance policy that has been adopted by the village board. I think the biggest success of this very tight budget is meeting the departmental needs while maintaining all of the municipal services in a cost-effective manner. With that, what is next as far as the process would be our first meeting in November, which would be the budget public hearing, whereby any discussion items or changes that are made here at the workshop would be reflected in an updated document for the village board, published to the public for public comment at that hearing, and then the second meeting in November would be the actual adoption of the budget and tax levy. So those are our next steps. With that, that is the executive budget proposal for 2021. As I mentioned before, staff is here and available to answer any questions. Otherwise, obviously, Paul and I are available as well.
All right, thank you. Just for level setting information, the budget does maximize all available dollars under the ERP, right?
Yes.
So even though we haven't been able to maximize levy limits in order to qualify for the 94,000, we've of expenditure restraint, we have spent up to that limit. Okay. So any changes, obviously, are not an addition. Any request would have to be basically a substitution. So, with that being said, typically how we manage this is we go through the department heads, and then we'll open it up for discussion at the village board level, and then we'll have feedback for Jesse and for Paul, and they can take it back and make any changes that are directed so by the village board. All right, so let's go ahead and start. Amber, I got you up first. Are you okay with the budget as it's been presented from DPW?
I am okay. I just want to mention a couple of things really quickly. It was a difficult budget year, as we all understand that it would be. I think the administration did a really good job of fairly trying to cut from each department to kind of make us all fiscally responsible for the budget, so I do thank them for that. But it is hard, the cost of everything continues to rise. The cost of the materials, the equipment, the things we buy on a daily basis to do our jobs continue to increase. So it's very, very hard to try and maintain those levels of service with the same amount of dollars every year. So, just something I wanted to share. We have had equipment cut every year that I've been here. And while I understand that, at some point, pushing equipment year after year after year, at some point, I do think that will catch up with us. But we do, a really good job as best we can to maintain our fleet and keep it running as long as possible. So, otherwise, do agree with.
Utility wise, basically it's an enterprise proprietary fund, so it seems to be doing fine on that end.
Yep,
Correct.
absolutely.
Okay. Megan, Park and Rec?
Sure, so, I have only been here for 1 week, but Jesse and Paul have been extremely, informative with the budget and going through all of that and, trusting, Director Sackstrom's recommendations, with that, so, I don't have any changes or.
Well, thank you and welcome aboard.
Thank you.
Chief Caponera?
Yeah, I'm good with the budget. You know, only being here a month, hadn't had a real time to delve into it too far, but I've got a really competent staff. I'm trusting that their decisions on the budget moving forward are good, and we look forward to next year. Hopefully we can get done what we need to get done by thinking outside the box, and the enterprise lease thing is one of those ways to do it.
All right, thank you very much. You know, even here being a month, we've experienced some impact, so not in addition to the leasing, obviously the Alexa Paul coming up on the agenda is, I think it's another, again, an example of new faces, new ideas, so thank you much. Chief Price?
Yes, the fire department budget is very similar to the year before. Operationally, we're very similar. The big change, of course, is the number of calls we're going on, which are increasing around 100 a year. That has a high cost with it. Without getting into all the detail, we had a committee of the whole meeting a few weeks back where we discussed really wages from everyone from entry-level volunteer firefighter to the chief's position. There were 3 points made. 2 of those points were addressed in this budget, 1 wasn't, and I would just ask that you consider all 3 of them tonight.
Okay.
That's all.
Director of Development, Jessica?
I have no changes. I support the executive budget as presented.
Okay. John? Library?
Yeah, budget's good. You know, the month's tight, so we want to keep the trend budget.
Okay. Paul, Finance?
I am good.
Paul, Clerk?
We are fine.
Jesse, General?
General is good. It is in line with previous year's expenditures and any contractual obligations we have for outside services. So
Okay.
we're in good shape.
All right, a couple points for the board. Generally speaking, what would you say our decrease in expenditure restraint dollars are on an annual basis? And then if I'm calling this out on a quick fly.
Back in 2018, we received about $147,000. In 2021, our estimate that we received from the state is $93,000. So it's been going down about 15% a year.
Okay. So I just think for the village board's consideration, at some point, the loss in state aid to meet expenditure restraint will drop to a certain point where it won't make sense for us to keep on running underneath our levy limits. You know, Amber makes a good point. You know, it gets more expensive to run the business every year. We're from 148, we're down to 93. I would think in another couple of years, based on this rate, you know, that if we're down to 50, 40,000, it may be just easier just to bite the bullet and say, for 40 grand, let's hit the levy limits and let's invest in the community. But at 94, you know, it's still a chunk of change. Okay, I'll open it up to the village board for comment. Again, we have maxed out expenditure restraint, so anything that is a request to add or change, it has to come from a different location. So if you are requesting something, please identify where you would like us to consider pulling those funds from.
I first of all have some questions for Captain Caponera, or Chief Caponera, excuse me. On the police administration, it's an increase of $167,000. Does that include you and a second captain? First line under police administration.
Comparing
It's on page 120.
You're comparing estimated 2020 to 2021 executive budget.
So that estimated
Yes.
column is a figure because of the vacancies, whereby the adopted column just to the left, the 332, 292, that was adopted with the chief and 2 captains command staff. So the 353, 428 number in the executive column, all the way to the right, establishes funding for a full command staff. What shape that takes yet, I would have to defer to chief, but we do want to make sure we have monies programmed in the budget so that chief can fill out his command staff.
And part of that is in 2020, we used a February 1 start date for a captain and the chief. Obviously, the chief wasn't hired until much later. That's why there's that big decrease. But then the 2021 also include an extra month for the chief's salary and the captain.
Second question, overtime, you mentioned that the PSC, that overtime should decrease. 150,000 that's estimated, you're basing that on this year's number? That'd be on page 124, fourth line.
I'm sorry, I'm trying to read in the dark, but.
Yeah.
So, and Chief, I can jump in very quickly while you're scanning in the dim light back there. So that 150 allocation is based upon what we saw for 2020 estimated, but obviously rolled back as staff fills out, but also looking back at some of the historical trends. Now that said, I understand in my conversations with Chief and also what Chief has shared with the Public Safety Committee, he is looking at different ideas to address that. So that said, it is a conservative budget figure to make sure we have an appropriate allocation depending upon his chief's implementation schedule of any changes he would want to make. So we're trying to be responsible here and address the situation with regards to overtime and any pending changes.
And my third question on page 128, contractual services, that is going up 7,000 or 5,000, and then heating and air conditioning was going up 6,000. Are we still looking at putting in a new system? Because I know we've had issues.
Yeah, so the heating and air conditioning is to replace the compressors in the units. We're trying to limp them along right now as we can, and it's going to be needed by the summer next year, so that's to repair those. And then I'm sorry, what was the other one you said?
I was line 210 contractual services, and then heating and cooling, which you just mentioned. So contractual services is probably related to that.
Yeah, that's for the building repairs. And I'm sorry. Yeah, the foundation repair for the building because we are.
Okay.
Yeah, it's shifting.
We did mention that. Okay.
That is another extenuating circumstance. So earlier this year, we had a contractor come through and actually review the conditions of our roofs, but also take a look at the masonry and tuck pointing and window seals at the different buildings. And unfortunately, he found that the police department building is slightly askew from its foundation. So we need to have an engineer come in and take a look to make sure it is still fundamentally sound as a building and what, if any, repairs are needed. So that is a definite uptick under that contractual services council.
Thank you.
Good.
Yes?
I have a number of questions. I know that Public Works had asked for another person, and I remember that Jesse had said no to that. And you had talked about having a salary savings somewhere with somebody retiring. Jesse, do you know which area was that salary savings in? Was it in, looking at the budget under Public Works?
Sure.
The only area I can see that it might be is maintenance and street repair.
Sure.
That employee, right? Because I couldn't find it.
Right, well, and that's where it gets tricky with the Public Works, because the Public Works actually has, to use an analogy, a series of buckets in which it pulls from, depending on the work a given individual is doing that day. So street repair would probably be the primary bucket, if you will, so that's where you may see the most significant change with regards to salary savings. And then it would be sprinkled across street repair and maintenance, bridges and dams, street cleaning,
Forestry,
yes. Yep.
nice.
So it really depends upon the work of the day, so to speak, as to where that time gets charged off. So unfortunately, there's not a good answer to your question saying right there is where you'll see it, because it is sprinkled amongst different funds within the public works overall budget.
So if that was gonna be a savings, did we keep that then in the budget, I'm assuming? You know,
Yes,
somebody
it would have been
retiring, so we're up a little in that respect. So there was did it change with the budget? So last year, the salary was higher, and now with the salary savings, it's lower. And I guess I wanted to see at what spot it was, but you're saying you can't give me one spot.
No, I can't, because any salary savings, well, first of all, pulling out the FTE that was requested, again, that would be across all those multiple different project areas, we'll call it. So that would be seen across all the different project areas. Salary savings as well, with the transition of staff from a long tenured employee higher on the pay grade to a newer employee lower on the pay grade, that would be in a similar situation, sprinkled across all of the different project areas within the public works budget. So that's what I mean by saying, unfortunately, I can't say that line item right there
Specific.
will give you that number you're looking for,
Okay.
because it's spread out.
But there's no FTE decrease.
Correct.
Yeah,
Correct.
Same number, right?
right, it was just the amount.
Right.
So my next question is, I saw in the police department budget, that we are keeping the same number of crossing guards, and I believe with the same amount of money. But I also saw somewhere else in the budget, and I'm sorry that I can't pull it right this second, where it noted that the school reimburses the village for that money. And I don't remember that being something we had talked about. I thought Chief Whitten had said that that's something we do pay for as a
We build
village.
a school that shows up as a revenue line under school district and charges for services, intergovernmental. That's the way we've always done it. So whatever we spend in payroll, school reimburses us.
Okay, so then that's different, because I thought in the past, Chief Whitten had said that we basically pay for it as a village.
I agree, Lisa, I remember him saying that.
Okay,
If you look at line.
what page?
Okay.
Page number.
Yeah, I was gonna just show you, it's under, page 94, school crossing guards revenue line. The very first line on page 94, under intergovernmental
Yep.
charges.
Yep, okay, all right, good, because that's something that I was unsure about from public safety. My next question is page 198, talking about the environmental special revenue fund. And it looks like that went up by 40%, or $20,000.
Correct. I can give a high-level explanation. Obviously, Amber can back me up on this with some more granular details. But the long and short of it is, the Environmental Revenue, Special Revenue Fund was established,
97, 98,
Okay.
around there.
literally decades ago, with in essence, a settlement payment to the village for environmental contamination in the area of Limestone Park. Those funds were parked and then drawn off of over time to address ongoing environmental monitoring, but also remediation projects as needed. That said, this increase for 2021 addresses not only a change in engineering firms so that we can work more aggressively towards closing out that environmental work, but also the services associated with complying with updated DNR guidelines on that monitoring and reporting. So that's why we're seeing the uptick in that particular fund.
And not specifically the Lime Hill and the West.
You know,
End
it's
project?
specifically lime kiln, yeah, the two different plumes that come from the old lime kiln landfill. And a lot of that increase is based on new DNR regulations and new initiatives that they want us to look at. So we're hoping, we're doing some work this year that may alleviate some of that work, so we're hoping to not have to spend it, but this is kind of a worst case scenario if, you know, if the DNR does continue to push for the things they're asking for at this point, that's our best estimate.
Okay.
Are there anything, just to add on to that, how many years, if any, do we have left in those funds? From the PCP, was that the primary contribution?
It was contributions from
I
3
know
or
it
4
was
or 5
like
companies.
5 or 6 companies, yeah. But I know we
have
knew it was
no-
gonna run out at some point.
Yeah, we have no funds left.
There's, okay, it's coming out,
It's
okay.
coming out, we're just transferring money into that fund. As you mentioned, if we eliminate ERP, we would probably move that to the general fund.
Okay. Sorry.
Next question is from page 153, under Public Works, equipment repair and maintenance. And my question here is, it looks like the estimated amount for this year under personnel services expenditures was 91,000. Adopted for this year was 106,000. And you're asking for 108,000 for next year. So that's really a difference of 17,000 between this year and next year. What was the savings there?
Certainly.
I mean, it seemed like, significant amount there. Is that people were off, or was it?
It's the labor pool again as a whole, transferred among about 15 to 20 different departments. So if there's an increase here, they still only have a limited pool. It means there's going to be a decrease in some other area that is funded by labor pool allocations.
Okay.
So it's still the same number of FTEs or the same number of crew members.
But as far as that 2020 estimated savings though, to the second part of your question, Trustee Harbeck, that is because for a while here this year, we were closed down. There was no maintenance activity going on because we were closed down. And so that's the function of that savings there under that 2020 estimated column.
Related to?
Basically the closure of facilities. Yep.
And the last thing I wanted to ask about is to go to the fire department area, page 191, 192, 193. So I did notice that for the first time in at least 3 years that I can see, there was an increase to the special revenue fund general property tax line item. The requested was more than the executive, and I'm wondering how you came up with 666,000 when it had been stated for the last 3 years at least. And is that specifically to make way for the part-time wages for?
Yes, at a very high level, and again, I can fall back to Paul for some of the more granular details here, but at a high level, that tax levy adjustment looks to address the overtime inquiry or issue that we were having, where that budget line item was struggling year over year, but also look to address a portion of the requested market rate adjustments for the pay on call floor. So what we get is the requested budget, then we look at the revenues as well with regards to the fees for service or the charges for service, what the town of Grafton's contribution would equate out to, what other funding may be available to program in, and then we can land on a property tax contribution. So we understood there was going to be an increase up front because we did want to, in accord with the committee of the whole's previous directions, to prioritize those market rate competitiveness, pay on call rates, and also point number 2, what were the overtime budgets that needed to be addressed. And so we were looking to adjust that tax levy contribution and what was the appropriate amount, while balancing the use of fund balance within that fund, but also the town's contribution and also other charges for service revenues.
So in the future, are we going to look at these couple of special revenue funds? I know there's library, there's I think part of the park, the aquatic area. Are you going to look at trying to give them a slight bump in their general property tax area? Year after year, like we would adjust a regular department and give them a little bit of a bump every year.
It's really based upon departmental submittals and needs. For instance, like the aquatics fund and some of the other special revenue funds, really those have been fixed over time and utilized accordingly by department heads. Obviously, we've had some changeover at the department head level, so those updates may change. The library is a bit unique, and there's a state law basically entitled maintenance of effort. So over the course of 3 years, it's a 3-year rolling average, Paul?
Yep.
Yes.
Whereby an amount of tax levy must be provided to the library for the library board and its director to utilize for their operations. And that is a straight up village contribution into the library budget. So they're a little bit unique in that they have a funding formula by which that guides our allocation in the budget, whereas other special revenue funds don't have a specific funding formula. So really it comes down to departmental requests and needs and how we can balance those levy allocations with the rest of the budget.
So for this year, you increased it by, is it maybe $52,000?
Rough and
The
tough.
executive number, 666,000. And if that's gonna include the first bump for the part-time paid on call people, will that go up again next year then to account for the next bump?
That is the plan, yes. Our departmental meeting with Chief Rice, explaining the expenditure restraint constraints we are under. What can we do to address this identified priority? And we came to a compromise of a step in 21 and then another step in 22, as far as just breaking apart those market rate adjustments over the course of 2 budget cycles to help it better fit instead of pulling the proverbial Band-Aid, so to speak, and inadvertently penalizing other areas of the budget. We're able to make moves towards addressing those priorities while maintaining the integrity of the remainder of the budget.
And then the last thing I just want to bring up is, of course, talking about the last of the 3 items that public safety had asked for you to consider, and also that the committee of the whole had talked about considering the last item for some salary adjustments for the chief and the division chief. I want to point out that I know you said they have to give something up or they have to find it in their budget. And I think with the fire department, there's a lot of areas that they could possibly find revenue. They're up on calls every year, and I do know that they're looking at changing and increasing some ambulance fees. We have our upcoming contract with Stockville that it looks like the special revenue fund will make some money from that. We have something in the works apparently with Aurora and St. Luke's with transferring stroke patients to St. Luke's because they can't get the care they need at the Grafton Hospital. And, you know, all these things are areas that we can make revenue, that the fire department can show revenue for that extra $9,700. I want to remind people that in other communities, they're hurting just like we are. And I'm sure you saw that in Mequon, they're going to add over $600,000 to their budget for the fire department alone, for part-time wages, for, I believe, 2 chiefs. And Mequon pays their people more than $10 an hour above and beyond what Grafton pays their people. They also pay their fire department and EMT paramedics COVID pay. So they get above and beyond another per hour pay. I would ask that you look for this, or maybe if Chief Rice can try to figure out where that money would come from in the budget and potential revenue for next year, that be considered, because we did talk about that at the community of the whole.
Certainly. At the committee of the whole, we did talk through all the different budget scenarios and the 3 priority points. With that, revenues not only in the fire department special revenue fund, but across all funds. We are very conservative with budgeting revenues. We can anticipate a certain number of homes coming online, therefore we can anticipate some permit revenues. We don't want to overestimate that and put us in a bad place with having to utilize fund balance at the end of the year. Or in this particular case, it would be have a very significant negative impact where if we were to overestimate revenues within this special revenue fund, that is the fire department's own fund balance that gets hit at the year end. And so we need to be very conservative. And really, these revenues were brought forward as part of the chief's budget submittal and confirmed during the course of our departmental meetings, whereby right now, the Stockville contract, sure, that may bring some revenue to the village, but it is a temporary contract and short term as well. That's the intention there. So that is not built in here. With regards to any pending arrangements, when this budget was crafted, those were not part of the calculations, so to speak, and quite frankly, without having anything concrete in front of me to responsibly estimate revenues, this is the highest and best and most conservative way or responsible way that I could balance expenditures with the revenue estimates that were provided with the budget submittal.
Okay.
So it is a balancing act.
And that's great, but, you know, to look at your numbers here, under the amount of money that would be made with transports, ambulance, rescue squad services, you've only increased it by about $5,000 from last year to this year. And that's certainly a lot less than another 50 or 100 ambulance rides. So I would just ask you to work with the chief and try to find the money. I mean, I know that that was the direction by public safety unanimously, and the town agreed with that. And we did talk about it at the community as a whole.
Also, you got a mistake also on page.
There is a mistake, you're right.
There's an extra $4,500 extra.
Yes, correct.
And that could be, I mean, I adamantly feel we should do something for our chief and assistant. Because what, $9,700 is your request for the two? Or right here, we got $4,500. And with the increases, I think, chief, don't you feel you can get that money out of the other areas that we discussed?
We are looking at an unusual year. Village administrator is correct. When we sat in this room in August to go over revenues, there was a lot of things that weren't on the table that are right now. At the committee of the whole, we talked in some detail, and we talked about our ambulance revenue. And ambulance revenue is a very touchy but important reality to my budget. We don't want to ever charge too much for that service. We would lose our credibility with our community. But I did take a look at it, and we are still working on it, but we have a very good idea now of what the increases are going to be. Largely, they're in transporting our paramedics. Our paramedic transports were very low compared to the market rate, so those will be adjusted. There's an increase in what most people probably call lift assist, that of only about $23 a lift assist. But we do over 340 lift assists a year. So that alone right there, we're expecting to see about $7,500 additional dollars next year. And the list goes on.
Limited by Medicare? Does Medicare only pay a certain dollar amount if it's a Medicare?
So,
No, sir, it's not touched by
let's
Medicare.
let's just bring this down to reality here. Revenues is that's part of the job. I mean, you're expected to maximize the revenues of this fund, and it's the same way that we would expect Amber to maximize the efficiencies of how she uses salt. And if you're looking at, how you manage your department, that is reflected in your performance review. So when you talk about, I have a struggle when, and I'm not saying if for the same job description, if the job changes, that's a whole different story. But, you're expected to do the pieces of the job that are covered under your job description. And one of them is maximizing revenues. And when you maximize revenues and you do a fantastic job, that's reflected in your review at the end of the year. And if you get a fantastic review, that translates into real dollars. So you have a lot of control over your destiny. But to come to the board in front of all your peers and say that I think I'm underpaid, that's a different discussion. That's a discussion, and we have to say, first off, we are in the middle of doing a countywide study that hasn't been finished yet. We'll have it done by the end of the year. That's my expectation, right? And there's also a southeastern Wisconsin, some kind of study that's going on that's being driven at the state level, you're saying, Paul? For,
Well, what I was saying that they're in the process of doing a wage survey.
so there's,
For all
there's,
staff.
you know, there's things that are going on right now that certainly, and if the job description, like the scope of what you're doing fundamentally changes, then absolutely. Then we do need to look at it, and we need to look at where it falls in as far as the pay grade. And those things are all valid, but I just don't understand, that's not part of the budget discussion that we're doing tonight. That is a personnel issue. That's not a budget issue. And I'm not saying it's not valid. It's just not, should not be part of the budget discussion that we're having tonight. Mhm.
So, we've been talking about this for years, and I have asked as early as late spring, early summer, middle of summer, to try to bring it to finance. And that didn't happen right away. Instead, we talked about it at the committee of the whole, which to me is we're one step past. And then we went backwards to finance, and then we talked about it there. It's frustrating because I think when we changed over from a volunteer department to a paid department, and that was a hard transition to make, we had to come up with the money, we had to transfer the money back to the village, however that was done, and we had a hard time coming up with a salary, you know, for that position. And there was a lot of hemming and hawing on that spot. And so we're to the point now where the Grafton Fire Department is something that Ozaukee County looks at and is amazed at. And that's because of the people who work there. The volunteers who work for next to nothing, and the good job that the chief and the division chief do. And that's all related to them. The fire department for Grafton is the best in the county. And unfortunately, they make the least amount of money. So frequently, these people are leaving. And that's one of the reasons they're leaving, because of the pay, especially when Recwan's going to pay $1 million. It's frustrating when I sit down and I look at some of the other pay for some of the other, maybe summer employees, and see that a yoga instructor and a choir instructor makes more money than the paramedics. That doesn't make sense to me. So that's bothersome, and that's something that we've talked about in public safety, and we want to try to change.
We do. Those kinds of studies are absolutely not a problem, that we can look at all of those. I don't have any issues with that at all.
Again, we've been asking for years, so that's not a
Again,
problem.
no, I mean, it came up this year, it was significant enough that I did not want to limit it to just finance. I felt the whole board needed to be involved in the discussion, that's why I made it a committee of the whole. The direction was given clearly to finance and to administration to do what we could do, to do what they could do. Clearly, there are progress is being made on a couple of the points. My expectation is that next year we would finish up that second jump, but realize that even staff as a whole is taking a 1 and a 1 versus a 2%. So, I mean, everybody in this whole room from a staff level is, you know, being impacted by this budget. It's not, this is not something that is specific to the fire chief.
No, but that's different. We're talking about people's salaries and wages from now going forward. We're talking about a 1 to a 1. I'm talking about the fact that from the beginning that the department transitioned over, you know, we were leery to put a dollar amount that would compare it to other communities. That's what I'm talking about.
So,
I have nothing else to say about,
Okay.
you know, the cost of living. I mean, everybody's the same there, but this is not the same.
well, I mean, I mean, we as a board, we decided what the numbers would be. I mean, not everybody here was on the board at the time, but, you know, the board is a decision-making body, and at the time, those numbers were agreed on. And again, if the job description or the responsibilities change, absolutely, it can be reviewed. We can look at it in the context of what were the job duties when he was hired. And maybe they have significantly changed. And if they have, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to use you in the third term. So, maybe that's where we look. And we say, you know, is there a significant change to the position since the chief was brought on? And if there is, then absolutely, then we should be looking at, you know, changing either the job description or the salary range or the pay grade. All those things are open for discussion. And I know
Mr.
you had a
Bronco,
question.
Mr. Bronco, if I could just say one thing, I don't think this is the appropriate venue to be discussing this. Who do you think's the most embarrassed person in the room right now?
I know, that's what I meant.
But I was told 4 years ago, my pay grade was not right and it was going to be fixed. And then I was told 3 years ago, your pay grade is not right, we're gonna fix it. And I was told 2 years ago, and I was told as soon as this year, it's going to be fixed. And then this gets dragged out, and now here I am, embarrassed. What do I say? What do I do to do it right? I try to do it right every year, and it's a different story. I've had you yourself, sir, tell me, we can get more firefighters if we need them, as long as you can find the revenue. And I thought that was the marching orders in the past. We worked on revenue. A lot of revenue is going to come in this year, I believe, for many reasons. So I just want to say I apologize if I'm speaking out of turn, forgive me, but it just doesn't seem to end. I did everything right, and here I am, speaking in front of all my peers and you folks, who I enjoy an awesome relationship with, and I feel like somebody isn't being honest, and it's not me.
Okay, thank you very much for your comments. Again, we will take this up. Apparently, it's an issue that, you know, the board has to address, and we will. And I will make my commitment and to the board and to you and the department is that we'll address it.
I say, if he can find the money to make for that, why can't it happen?
Because then we could have Amber could come in here and say, well, I saved, you know, $20,000 on a bid on a truck. Why shouldn't I get a piece of that? What if Jessica came in here and said, you know, I was able to save $10,000 on the planning software. Why shouldn't I get that? I mean, we've got to separate the issues of budget versus personnel. And we'll have to deal with it. I will make that commitment to you. But it's a personnel issue. It's not an issue for tonight's discussion.
I just want to say one more thing. With the fire department though, we're always being told, you're different because you're the special revenue fund. We're different, we can't just give you money. I mean, that's what we're told. If you can find the money, go ahead and show me. So that's what we've been told in the past.
Okay. All right. We'll put it on the table. If the comments have been made, I want to focus strictly on the remaining of the budget. Dan had his hand up first.
Yeah, I just, you know, again, Chief Price, we really appreciate the fine work that you do. Jesse, I would ask that you and Paul do take a look at the special revenue fund. I think this has been covered, and I appreciate how conservative we are, but I do agree with the number of ambulance calls that we certainly are getting. With the increase in revenues, I think we might be a little conservative on that 385 number. I'm asking that you take a look at that. I think that we're going to be a little bit low on that. With that said, I just feel I need to make this comment, and I'll make it very quick. Department of Public Works has increased the number of the miles of roads by 6.73% since 2018. Since 2010, I believe you've been at the same staffing levels, and I've heard this group complain vehemently about the conditions of our parks and the grass cutting. And I just think that, you know, certainly looking at, if not, you know, later this year, but certainly the next year, looking for an increase in FTE would be appropriate, given the amount of time and effort that we have to put in. I don't see any of our crack ceiling cut down, any of our asphalt being added, I see more tree work being done, I see more maintenance being done. I think that's something we really have to look at, and you know, again, I feel like I have to advocate for the Department of Public Works for that. Thank you.
Okay.
Bill Harbeck, I just want to make an observation and a comment about the fire department issue. I attended the committee of the meeting of the whole, and at that time Chief Rice presented his 3 budget requests. And the committee of the whole directed the administrator to find ways to address the market imbalance that we have in that. A question was asked of Chief Rice, you're not talking about for this year's budget, you're talking about for next year's budget. And he said, yes, that's right, I'm not asking for anything this year. So the direction was to find that money for next year's budget, which is where we are.
No,
Let me finish my
no, sir,
comment.
you have to realize you're misrepresenting what was said. The
I'm
direction
sorry.
was said to staff to try,
Right.
and not, you said that it was to do.
No, well, okay, I didn't mean absolutely, but it was to consider for next year's budget.
Mhm.
So here we are for next year's budget. I don't know why we would risk jeopardizing the relationships we have with probably the best fire chief in the state, but absolutely a gem for us, and his assistant chief for $9,700. And if the direction is we'll take care of it, then it ought to be taken care of this year to be implemented next year. So if he's got the revenues, the revenue's been underestimated, and we can take care of it next year, it ought to be done now rather than dragging it out, because he's sitting there saying, I'm not appreciated, I'm not paid, I'm $15,000 below the average. We need to give him the money to make him feel like he belongs and is appreciated.
So
We should do it now, not some
again,
undefined time.
The village has to maintain expenditure restraint. What you're talking about is revenues inside of a department. Those revenues will be there regardless. If this budget does not change the fact that we will be collecting revenues. So it's a personnel issue. We figure out the personnel issue, the revenues are still there. It's not like we're voting to say, don't do the work, don't do the ambulance calls.
Right now, the revenues may be substantially underestimated, which therefore puts you in a position where you can't afford it. If the revenues are underestimated and there's way more than $9,700 of revenues that they can generate, then this should be a no-brainer.
Right. But that's not the decision for tonight. Tonight is, what can we spend? And we can only spend up to expenditure restraint. Now, internal to the department, the revenues that they generate and how, the fire department fund balance is used and how we can possibly, address some of the chief's concerns, that funding mechanism doesn't change with anything that we do tonight or in the budget cycle, because it's internal revenues inside of a special fund. Does that make sense? I mean, if I'm not...
I think I know what you're saying, but you gotta figure it out, because this is really important. So you gotta figure out where...
But I already said that tonight. I have already committed that to the chief, and I said that in front of the board and in front of administration. I've already committed that. I mean, I said I would. I believe the board thinks it's important. Obviously, the chief believes it's important, so we'll make it happen. We'll figure it out. We'll figure out what the issues, what the concerns. Well, maybe, like Lisa said, maybe we were just under to begin with. But we can't. This budget, what we're talking about tonight, does not impact what the revenues are that the police or the fire department would collect inside of their fund. It's a different story. I understand the personnel issue, and I apologize to the chief, but we'll address it. It'll get addressed. And Jesse's here, he's making notes, so it'll happen. Other questions on the budget?
Yes, under the village. Oh, I quoted it. Under the village clerk thing, we're spending a lot of money on paper. Is there any way we can put in our budget for all of us to get laptops or tablets?
Yes, that was a project identified for my office for this year. Quite frankly, with the craziness that has been 2020, with all the policy and operational changes related to COVID, that project simply was not done. Now, is that something we should look into? Absolutely. I don't have a budgetary impact of what it would be to bring on new hardware for the entire village board and how that would be offset by reduced paper costs. I don't have that breakdown. So with that, we could commit to that. As far as reviewing it, maybe it could be a mid-year implementation next year after the appropriate review. But where I sit right now with the crafting of this budget, I was not able to conduct a return on investment analysis to properly say, yup, that should be a course of action under this budget proposal. Now, that being said, could it be done? Certainly, but it is not specifically set forth in this budget. But it could be a goal we can look for, yes.
Thank you.
Tom?
And I was going to bring that same issue up, and thanks for the explanation or clarification, Jesse. But it starts with the area of emphasis. We probably had this for years in terms of a sustainable guide plan and decreasing the amount of paper and looking at ways to reduce our new processes for the meeting packets. So it's something that needs to be addressed. It's something that, as a community that is interested in sustainability and has as one of our areas of emphasis, eventually we have to do something. And Dave, myself, have been talking about it for a couple of years at least already. So I appreciate the initiative to at least look into it and try to make it happen sooner rather than later.
I can offer a bit of a silver lining to the paperless packet issue. Internally at the staff level, we did significantly change the packet distribution process, whereby, I'll use myself as the example. I get a full village board packet, I get a full finance committee packet. All of the other packets, unless I have because I review all of them, unless I have a specific business item which I have to appear before that committee, I only get the agenda. So I don't get the entire set of packets anymore, and that has also been updated for other departments as well, whereby in certain instances they get an agenda or won't get anything, they'll just jump out to the web and look up what the packet is in our agenda. So we've made some internal changes, but again, the larger scale project I think would be where the gains would be seen.
Can I finish up here too, Jim? So I have a whole bunch of questions and things that would probably take me the length of a Packer game to get through tonight. So I'm going to be real brief. Paul, I'd like to schedule a meeting with you. I'll give you a call, similar to last year, where I can kind of go over a number of areas where I think corrections, and maybe you've caught some of them already, but I've caught a number of areas that we could clean up.
Draft put over, we didn't have time.
Okay. So,
yeah, we know there's always going to be corrections, but I appreciate, give me a call and we'll set up a time.
We'll do that.
We'll review.
Also have a number of questions or clarifications for department heads, but there's probably too many to cover here, so I'll just send each department head that I have questions on an email. Is that okay?
If you wouldn't mind, Trustee Krueger, please send them to me.
I will.
I will distribute to department heads and then redistribute to the entire board. What I want to avoid here is any inadvertent conversations outside of a public meeting. So it'll be, the inquiry will come to my office. The answer to that inquiry will be provided to the board. With that, please do not cross-pollinate emails. Do not discuss. The specific question will be asked, that will be answered to the extent we can if there are follow-ups. But I want to make sure we get the information in your hands, but we want to make sure the open meetings law is maintained. So I appreciate that.
Thank you, Jesse. Just a quick comment on the Veterans Park improvements. That's a project that's been going on for several years. It didn't get done this last year, and there were complications and circumstances certainly that prevented John Sastrom from proceeding forward. I noticed that we have $75,000 in the budget for that. I don't know that John was going to go ahead and get some quotes. I'm not sure if he had completed that or not. The 75 might be on the weak side, and he was thinking of generaling the project himself and asked me to help him with it as well, which I agreed to. I'm not sure it's going to happen that way going forward, so we'll have to take a look at that number again and whether or not we need some help with actually making it happen and whether our price is sufficient.
Absolutely. That submittal was placed there and left there under the submittal received from Director Sashman. That said, in our budget meeting with Director Fallon, we talked about that and we explained just that there is a history to that project. It has been kind of lingering out there, and we don't know if that 75 is a good number. Exactly to your point, Trustee Krueger. And so my direction to our new Park and Rec Director was to look at the history, look at that project file, look and see what plans, if any, are on file, take a look at what the condition of that building is, and then have the discussion to see what truly needs to be done there, and really look to update that number. However, like I said, it was requested, and so in essence, it's a placeholder at this point, but I did ask for a much closer review of it by the Department of Director.
Okay, and then one final question regarding utility infrastructure improvements, and we're identifying in the budget almost $62,000 in terms of water and sewer replacement that coincides with street improvements that we'll be undertaking in 2021. So this is I assume, and I think we talked about it at the committee level, this is a worst case scenario price for water and sewer replacement, is that correct?
It should be a fairly accurate budget number.
So you know for sure then that all of the streets that Amber has already identified for street improvements will also require water and sewer replacement as well.
Correct. Yep, all of them that are on the street improvement plan. We have identified the areas that require water and sewer and budgeted for them.
Next year is a really high utility year, just as far as the road program is concerned as a whole. A lot of the streets that were a priority because of utilities, not necessarily because of the roadway, did fall into 2021, so it's probably higher than some other years have been.
So the utility, as you know, follows the Department of Public Works road replacement program, and sometimes we have years that are very expensive, where we replace a lot of water and sewer main, and some years we have very little. For instance, this year, a lot of emphasis was placed on First Avenue, which we didn't have the utility replacements. We had some sewer lining, but we didn't have any utility replacements, so our capital improvement costs for those replacements were very low this year. So, and I think that's going to be typical over the next 5 years. You'll see some years that are very expensive and some that are not.
Okay, well then this goes to you, Paul, in terms of retained earnings for both the water department and sewer department. Sewer department, with all of its rate increases over the last 4 years, certainly has generated a nice pot of reserve cash that can address and do those improvements, those sewer replacements without borrowing. And that has been the intent of these rate increases, at least part of the intent to raise that amount of reserve cash available. We haven't raised the water rates since 2017. There's not as much being generated. I'm not sure we really have enough money to pay for the water improvements if we keep those two utility accounts and funds separate, or do we not do that?
Well, the water utility, roughly $600,000 to $700,000 a year was earmarked for main replacement or main improvements. With the new sewer rate, we've upped that to about $1 million a year. So any funds that aren't used, you'll see maybe an increase and decrease to the net asset line.
Right.
Just because we have cash on reserve that we are utilizing the following year. So this year, if you look, we spent about $50,000 on sewer relining. So yeah, there's close to $1.5 million that has been collected, that has not been paid, that we'll use for the replacement schedule next year. Okay. We do have reserves that are indicated in the audit, but we will take note of that if there is a situation like this year, that money has already been collected and retained for.
I got it. Thank you.
Amy, and then
Good.
I just have a comment about the library budget. I'd like to thank Director Hansen on a job very well done with the budget. I'm pleased that there's a slight increase with the special revenue fund towards the library fund and a small bump with the repairs and maintenance line items. However, I do want to make sure that we're aware of three large expenditures that are kind of leering in the background. Each board member meeting at the library, we talk about the roof, which has had leaks in the past. It's the original roof, it's 30 years old. I know that's going to be a large ticket item, but I don't want us to lose sight of that, as well as the windows and the elevator. Those three items have come up again and again. And I know it's a year that we've done a lot with pushing things back, and Director Hansen has done a good job with that, but I don't want us to lose sight of that. The library department doesn't get as much attention as some of these others do, so please keep that information in mind.
Jesse, page 82. For Park and Rec, actually Park and Open Space Fund, for years, I mean, ever since I've been on the board, normally the number is $30,000. I see it is again. 2018, it was $35,000. So it seems like we're going backwards or staying the same. And you're asking that fund stay the same year after year after year. And why can't that get bumped up just a little? I would like you to do a little more digging or creative financing as to maybe try and get that number up.
That is a property tax allocation, and the reason for the change back from 2018 into 2019 is very similar to the circumstances we're facing here this evening with expenditure restraint tax, where anytime you spend tax levy, except for on debt service, anytime you spend tax levy, that counts towards that expenditure restraint. And that was an adjustment made in speaking with, at the time, Director Salstrom and the Committee of the Whole and Village Board to change that allocation. Now, that $30,000 annual allocation, if that is not spent within its entirety, is maintained within that fund if needed, and can be, in essence, accumulated.
So you can roll it over.
Yes. So with that, that is an ongoing allocation, and again, the circumstances are eerily similar to that change made in 18 to 19. However, we did not want to adjust that any further at this point, as not quite as dire a situation, but still facing the tax that we are.
Does it stay at $30,000 because you've looked at rollover dollars in the past and that fund's in a good place? So why should we adjust it?
There's a little bit of that, but also a little bit of input from the director submitting the budget, saying, yep, that is an appropriate funding amount because year over year, I understand that I can either use all of it or some of it and roll the remainder over. So it's a little bit of, again, I go back to this balancing act of feedback from the director themselves with their budget request, but also too, how is that, what is the health of that fund? So it is a balance between the two, and for the purposes of this budget, $30,000 was once again appropriate. And based upon the previous director's budget submittal.
Thank you. Any last comments? All right. With that being said, we'll go ahead and adjourn directly into the village board meeting. I will give any and everybody a chance that wants to depart. You're welcome to leave. You're welcome to stay.